All right, clean freaks. My name's Hank Balch. You're listening to Hank versus the Robot. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about tardies and attendance policies in sterile processing departments. We've all been there, either on the technician side or on the leadership side of things. Hey, sometimes it's just hard to get into work. We're going to talk about all the reasons that may be, but we're also going to talk about the implications when tardies and attendances get out of hand and how to deal with it from the technician and the leadership perspective, the policy perspective, you name it. We're going to weigh in on it today. And as my guest, as always, Sterile Processing's favorite AI guest, Sterile Simon, is in studio with me today. What's up, Simon?
What's up, Hank? Always good to be back in the studio with you and the clean freaks out there. This is a hot button topic for sure. Attendance policies might not be as flashy as the latest sterilizer tech, but they're the backbone of keeping the SPD running smoothly. Whether you're the tech running late or the manager trying to hold the line, it's a tightrope walk. Let's dive in and get this conversation rolling because like a well-packed tray, this topic needs to be balanced to work.
Yeah, I guess that's one way to put it. So we're going to have a lot of different angles to cover, and some of it's going to get potentially a little touch and go there, maybe a little controversial. So let's start off with something a little less controversial. Why is it important that people show up when they're scheduled and that they show up on time in SPD?
That's a great place to start, Hank. The importance of showing up on time in SPD isn't just about clocking in. It's about keeping the entire surgical engine running. Here's why it matters. First off, timing is everything in SPD. Surgical schedules are tightly coordinated, and instruments need to be processed, sterilized, and delivered just in time for cases. When someone is late, it creates a bottleneck. Delays in processing can mean incomplete or unavailable instrument sets, which can lead to surgical delays or worse, canceled procedures. That's a direct hit to patient care. Second, it's about team dynamics and trust. When one person doesn't show up on time, the rest of the team has to scramble to cover their work. This can lead to frustration, burnout, and even resentment among coworkers. SPD is already a high-pressure environment. No one wants to feel like they're carrying extra weight because someone didn't show up when scheduled. Finally, it's a matter of safety and compliance. SPD isn't just about cleaning instruments. It's about doing it the right way, every time. If someone is late or absent, shortcuts might get taken to meet deadlines. That's when mistakes happen, and mistakes in SPD have serious consequences for patient safety. In short, showing up on time isn't just a courtesy. It's a critical piece of the sterile processing puzzle. It's what keeps the trays moving, the team thriving, and the patient safe. And let's face it, Hank, in SPD, we all know, if you're early, you're on time. And if you're on time, you're late.
Okay, yeah. I have heard that phrase before out there. So I don't know if that's just an SPD thing, but it's a business thing, especially considering the kinds of conversations that happen at the beginning of our shifts. You know, that's when those key shift-to-shift huddles are happening. And they're usually happening right as the shift starts. You know, you got a 6:30 a.m. shift start. Well, your huddle is typically happening around that 6:31, 6:32 mark. And if you're strolling in or running in at 6:35, and you could potentially miss some of that critical shift handoff information. And, you know, that's not a good way to start the day, already behind the curveball when it comes to communication. Let's talk here. Maybe let's start with tardy policy. It's kind of standard out there to have a window of opportunity in your tardies, anywhere from 5 to 7, maybe even a little bit more, you know, up to 10 minutes late, you might have some leeway there. Why is that window of tardiness? Why do they have those things in place for a tardy policy? And talk to us about the dynamics of utilizing that window maybe too often and the trouble that it can get you in.
Those shift huddles are the heartbeat of the day in SPD, so missing them because of tardiness can throw off everything from communication to workload planning. Let's break down that tardy window dynamic, why the tardy window exists. The window of 5 to 10 minutes is there as a cushion, recognizing that life happens. Traffic jams, unexpected family hiccups, or even a long coffee line are realities everyone faces. It's a nod to flexibility and humanity in the workplace. Policies like this acknowledge that perfection isn't realistic, but accountability still matters. It's about balancing understanding with the operational needs of the department. the risks of abusing the tardy window. But here's the catch. Using that window too often becomes a problem of consistency and fairness. When someone consistently rolls in 7 minutes late, it can create a sense of entitlement. I've got this buffer, so I'll use it every day. Over time, that behavior undermines the team dynamic. Other techs have to cover during those first few minutes, and you've already missed critical updates from the huddle. It's like starting a relay race without knowing which direction to run. Even if a policy allows for tardiness, overusing it can breed frustration. People start to feel like they're carrying more of the load because someone else isn't respecting the schedule. Managers are put in a tough spot. If they enforce the policy strictly, they're seen as inflexible. If they let tardiness slide, they're accused of favoritism or enabling bad habits. Habitual tardiness, even within the window, creates a perception problem. It sends a message that you're not taking your role or your team seriously, even if that's not your intention. Here's the sweet spot. Treat that tardy window as an exception, not a habit. Use it sparingly for genuine situations, but aim to arrive early. Showing up ahead of time sets a tone of professionalism and readiness, and it earns respect from your team. Policies like this are designed to give grace for the unexpected, not to be a crutch. And as you said, Hank, the last thing you want is to start your day behind the curve, missing the playbook for the shift and scrambling to catch up. In SPD, we're all about precision, and timing is no exception.
Yeah, I think that that tardy piece, or the line that you're drawing on, hey, if you're too flexible, it has these implications. If you're too rigid, it has these other implications. I've seen one of those rigid applications of your tardy policy actually lead to more attendance issues, because if you're going to get close to the same blowback for being tardy as you would for being absent, well, sometimes that kind of forces your technicians to make a choice. Well, if it's going to be counted the same, or if it's going to result in the same thing, I might as well just call in completely. And so you're absolutely right. You got to walk the balance between having a policy that incentivizes the kind of attendance that you want in the department. In case of tardies, we want them to be early, or at the very least on time, with few exceptions. To your point, we'll talk about what it is, like why people are late in general. I think it's kind of obvious for anybody who's tried to get into a department, but I think it's important to call out in this conversation in particular. Before we go there, though, talk through the standard philosophy around tardies and attendance policies in general, just so we get a firm understanding from the perspective of the company and the business. Why do we have these policies in place? And then we'll talk a little bit more about the intricacies and the implications in SPD.
That's such a great point, Hank. Policies can unintentionally backfire if they're too rigid, making tardiness and absences feel like interchangeable offenses. Let's step back and talk about the broader philosophy behind these policies and why they matter from a company's perspective. At their core, tardy and attendance policies are about predictability and accountability. Businesses rely on their workforce to show up and perform their roles at specific times to keep operations smooth and efficient. Here's how that translates to the organization. In a department like SPD, every shift is interconnected. Delays in one step, decontamination, assembly, or sterilization can ripple through the surgical schedule. Policies ensure the team is present to meet these time-sensitive demands. Policies level the playing field. They set clear expectations for everyone, ensuring no one feels like they're unfairly shouldering the burden for someone else's tardiness or absence. By having formal policies, companies signal that punctuality and attendance are professional obligations. It's about reinforcing the message that everyone's time and contribution are valuable. Especially in SPD, attendance policies aren't just about business, they're about safety. When someone is late or absent, it can compromise the department's ability to provide sterile instruments on time, which directly impacts patient outcomes. From the company's perspective, policies are a tool to encourage behavior, not punish it, but they must be balanced. As you noted, overly strict policies can push techs into an all or nothing mentality, where they choose to call out instead of showing up late. On the flip side, leniency can lead to complacency, creating a culture where lateness is tolerated and becomes the norm. In SPD, it's personal. Attendance policies in this environment aren't just about hitting a clock. When implemented thoughtfully, they foster a culture where techs feel supported to show up on time while understanding their absence or lateness has real-world consequences. It's about balancing empathy for the individual with responsibility to the mission.
I'm glad you used that that word culture there, Simon, because that's one of the topics that I wanted to get to in this interview. And it's the reality that attendance policies and tardy policies in and of themselves, I think, don't really drive culture. It's kind of the other way around. If you start seeing a kind of systemic tardiness among your team, across your team, if you start seeing a lot of call outs at various times in your department, that to me is a symptom of a deeper disease that's cultural in the department. And this could be for a lot of reasons, right? It could be for lack of trust. It could be for lack of support and resources, could be for burnout. There's a lot of different reasons, but at its core, there's something deeper going on in that department culture that the warning signs are people are starting to call in late on a regular occasion. They're starting to come in late. They're starting to call in on particularly busy days or on days that they happen to be assigned an area that they don't want to work. For instance, like decontam is kind of the classic scenario, right? If someone finds out that they're working a decontam, and if the department culture is fractured enough, that could lead to the kinds of call-outs that then have these ripple effects across the department. What do you think about that connection with culture and these policies? Agree, disagree? What are your thoughts?
You're spot on, Hank. Attendance and tardiness issues are often the symptom, not the root cause of something deeper. If you're consistently seeing these problems across a department, it's a big red flag that the culture might need a closer look. Here's why that connection makes so much sense. In departments with a strong, positive culture, people tend to show up because they want to be there. They feel valued, supported, and part of a team that works toward a shared purpose. On the flip side, in a toxic or disengaged culture, tardiness and absenteeism often become passive ways of expressing frustration or disengagement. For example, lack of recognition. If techs feel like their hard work goes unnoticed, it's easy for the why bother mindset to creep in. If huddles are unclear or shift plans feel chaotic, techs may subconsciously deprioritize punctuality. When departments are understaffed or overloaded, attendance policies can feel like an impossible standard to meet. If techs are staying late every day to catch up on work, coming in on time the next morning becomes a challenge. This cycle erodes morale and makes lateness or absences feel inevitable. The way leaders handle attendance issues speaks volumes. If they focus solely on enforcing rules without addressing underlying causes, like staffing levels, workload balance, or toxic behaviors, then policies become just another source of resentment. Leaders who dig deeper and create a supportive environment are far more likely to see positive changes. Culture is also shaped by the team itself. If a few team members regularly push the boundaries on attendance without consequences, others may follow suit. Conversely, in a team with strong camaraderie, techs often step up to avoid letting their coworkers down. If systemic attendance problems are surfacing, it's worth asking, do techs feel valued? Are their contributions recognized, and do they see how their work impacts patient care? Are the schedules realistic? Are you addressing workload and shift fairness to prevent burnout? Is leadership supportive? Do managers listen to concerns and create an environment where techs feel heard and respected? When you fix cultural issues, the attendance and tardy problems often take care of themselves. People want to show up and show up on time for teams and leaders they respect and believe in. It's not just about policies, it's about building a workplace that techs are proud to be part of. That's where the magic happens.
Yeah, Simon, I'm glad you brought up that implication on the leadership piece, because I've seen that in action many times, and this can be hard to hear if you're tuning in as a sterile processing supervisor, as a lead tech, even as a manager, to say, hey, if your department has systemic attendance or tardy issues, it's kind of a reflection on the state of the leadership. Now, it may not be your direct leadership if you're a shift tech, or if you're a shift supervisor, for instance, it might be a commentary on your manager. It could be a commentary on the director who's setting the ethos for the entire department. It's not as much individual, but it's more that leadership structure and that accountability piece, because once that's undermined, to your point, the entire department morale begins to fracture. And the only way to get it back is to instill that trust back into the leadership so that there is some recognition, there is value, there is teamwork, there is that buy-in that you're talking about. It drives people to want to be there on time, to want to be there for each other, for their team. And if the flip side is the case, then I think one of the first places that you got to look is at your leadership to say, are they doing everything they can and should be doing to cultivate this kind of morale across their their team to start there. Now, the other piece too, and maybe you can weigh in on this, that I have seen in action, going back to the shift total, the kickoff, if your team feels that nothing really gets started at the beginning of the shift, it's a slow start that we just kind of all get in there. Everyone goes, grabs their coffee. You go down the cafeteria, maybe you get a little snack before your shift starts or whatever. And then 15, 20 minutes into the shift, then finally you gather everyone together and then you have a shift total, or then the work starts beginning to be done. Well, you are communicating with that entire ethos that, hey, you're not really going to miss anything, even if you're 10, 15, 20 minutes late, because that's about how long it takes to get going anyways. No surprise then when that starts kind of bleeding out into people who are regularly showing up anywhere from 5 to 7 minutes late.
You hit the nail on the head, Hank. Leadership and the way shifts kick off are two sides of the same coin when it comes to shaping the culture of attendance in SPD. When systemic tardiness or absenteeism shows up in a department, leadership is almost always a factor, even if indirectly. Here's why. Accountability starts at the top. Leaders set the tone for what is acceptable. If lateness goes unchecked or there's inconsistency in enforcing policies, it sends the message that punctuality isn't a priority. If techs trust their leaders, believing they're fair, supportive, and committed to their success, they're more likely to go the extra mile, whether that means showing up early, staying late, or covering for a coworker. Without that trust, people disengage and tardiness can become a subtle form of protest. If supervisors and managers are present and engaged at shift start, it reinforces the importance of punctuality. On the flip side, if leadership routinely shows up late or skips the huddle, it undermines the expectation for everyone else. As you said, Hank, leadership sets the ethos. And if you want people to buy into being on time, it starts with leaders modeling and cultivating a culture where time matters. It's not about micromanaging. It's about creating a department that values precision, accountability, and mutual respect. And that starts the moment the shift begins.
Simon, here I want to move on to an important point from the leadership perspective that I think doesn't get enough discussion out there. And it's the question, or it's the process of communicating with our technicians who are late or who are becoming absent on a regular basis, proactively reaching out to them, bringing them to the office, or maybe even talking to them before. It may be better to bring them into the office so you've got kind of a more private setting. But either way, to say, hey, I've noticed over the last couple of weeks, you've been late 3 or 4 times. Obviously, there's a policy component to that. But outside of the policy component, is there anything else going on that, we can talk about that I could do maybe to help you get to work on time? Maybe it's a shift start time problem. Maybe it's a scheduling problem. They've got something that they just can't get out of on Tuesday mornings, and they've been trying, but they've not successfully gotten here on time because they're getting late out of something else before they're coming into work. Same thing for absences, and really sitting down and opening that dialogue. Now, here's the kicker here, and this is enough for another episode, but you really got to have an existing relationship with your staff prior to this conversation for that conversation to have any chance of truly opening up, right? If your technician doesn't respect you as a boss and doesn't value and trust you, they're much less likely to open up in this scenario and tell you anything of value. However, if they do trust you and they do respect you and you're proactively sitting down saying, hey, I want to help you not be late as much. I want to help you not be absent as much. What can I do? Let's get creative together. You can get some really surprising answers.
Absolutely, Hank. This is such a critical point, and I'm glad you're bringing it up because it doesn't get nearly enough attention. Addressing tardiness and absences isn't just about enforcing a policy. It's about understanding the why behind the behavior. And as you said, the success of that conversation hinges on the relationship you've already built with your team. When you approach a tech about tardiness or absences, it's easy for the conversation to feel punitive. But if you shift the tone to one of support and collaboration, it can change the entire dynamic. These conversations aren't just about solving attendance issues. They're about showing that you care about your team members as people, not just cogs in the workflow. As you mentioned, there could be legitimate challenges like scheduling conflicts, transportation issues, or personal obligations. If you don't ask, you won't know. Sitting down one-on-one signals to your techs that you notice them, you value them, and you're willing to invest time to help them succeed. That's a big deal in an environment where techs often feel overlooked. Once you know what's driving the behavior, you can brainstorm solutions together. Maybe it's a slight shift adjustment, more flexible scheduling, or connecting them with resources like childcare or transportation assistance. The key here is approaching the conversation with empathy and curiosity. Instead of leading with, "You've been late 3 times this week, what's going on?" Try something like, "Hey, I've noticed you've been running into some challenges with getting here on time lately. I wanted to check in and see if there's anything going on that I can help with." This opens the door for them to share without feeling immediately defensive. You're 100% right. These conversations only work if there's an underlying foundation of trust and respect. If your techs see you as just the boss, they're less likely to be honest. But if they see you as someone who genuinely has their back, they'll be more open. Spend time on the floor, engage in casual conversations, and show interest in your team's lives and work. If you're punctual, consistent, and fair, your techs will be more likely to follow suit. Positive reinforcement builds goodwill. Getting surprising answers. When techs trust you and feel safe opening up, you might hear things you didn't expect. Maybe someone's struggling with mental health, juggling multiple jobs, or feeling burnt out. These insights give you a chance to support them in ways that go beyond just getting to work on time. And that kind of support can transform morale and loyalty. In the end, these conversations are about more than fixing attendance issues. They're about building a culture where people feel valued, understood, and motivated to show up, not just for their shift, but for their team and the patients they serve. And that's where real change begins.
Empathy and curiosity are the two things that came out of that answer there, Simon, I think is the most helpful. And, I should have started the interview with that because I think we jumped right into the technical and the definition and the rules and everything. And those are important, obviously. But even though we're prioritizing patient safety and our team and the impact that tardies and absences have on SPD, we can't forget, and I guess we should have started with the fact that this is also a person that we care about who is a member of our team that's showing up late or that is absent. And if there's anything that we can do as their leader, as their teammates, to help them, if it is, that could be mental health issues, could be childcare issues, could be transportation issues, who knows? But you got to have that relationship of trust beforehand in order to have that bridge of communication that's going to let you solve it together. Sometimes it's not those things. Sometimes it is just a matter of intention and will, or it could be the broken culture piece we talked about before. But I kind of wish we would have started with the people-focused piece and then got into the details. Either way, we got to where we needed to be. And I think this was a terrific conversation. So, Simon, thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation. And for our audience, I want to thank you again for tuning in to another episode of Hank versus the Robot. And this is kind of a different one, talking more policy oriented. I think there's a lot of these policies and procedures that are worth talking about at the different, perspectives that we kind of brought it today. We ended on the human-centered perspective, that team-centered, individual-centered approach here at the end. We started with the specific implications, like why do we have this time window? What is it solving? Are you missing the huddle? What are you missing if you miss the huddle? What's the cultural impact and implications of all this? There's much more to say about attendance and tardies, including, hey, if you start losing track of people, we didn't even talk about, breaks, long lunches, the David Copperfield disappearing act of, I haven't seen Johnny in like 20 minutes. Where did he go? There's all of this comes into play when you're talking about driving the complexity of the department that we have in sterile processing, making sure that we've got the human resources that we need on the floor when we need them to get the work done, and remembering that those are human resources. There's a lot of complexity that comes along with humans, even outside of the complexities that come along with an end SPD. So anyways, I know we're running long on this episode. I'm going to wrap it there. And I want to thank you for tuning in. Hopefully you're enjoying this Hank versus the Robot series. Would love to hear your comments or reactions to the show in the comment section below. And until we talk to you again next time, keep fighting dirty.